Happiness. 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 The U.S. Declaration of Independence refers to all of us being endowed by our Creator with certain natural rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, what is the pursuit of happiness? What is it? What does it mean to pursue happiness? Because I think that's kind of a definition of what it means to be a human being. We all strive to be happy. If we are not happy, we are sad or angry or exhausted or uncomfortable. Happiness is something that human beings generally want to experience. But what is happiness? And how can happiness be acquired? This is something a lot of people spend their lives trying to figure out. It's like a code. It's like a code they're trying to crack. Right? If I could just figure out exactly the right way of doing things, I can have the right friends, if I can have the right job, I can have the right spouse or partner, if I can have enough money, if I can have enough popularity and prestige, I can find happiness. This is the state of mind many of us spend our whole lives in. It's like we're walking around with a Rubik's cube or an 8 ball. All right. Imagine a Rubik's cube, you're like this, turning, 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 right? And you're trying to crack the code so you can be happy. Or you got an 8 ball and you're like shaking it up. Can I be happy? Can I be happy? Can I be happy? Yes, yes, I can be happy. Can I be happy? Can I be happy? Can I be happy? No, not today. Don't count on it. Can I be happy? Can I be happy? Can I be happy? Right? This is a way many of us live our lives, right? It's almost like a puzzle that we're trying to solve. And it can be frustrating and it can be confusing. And we all know that there are some people that seem to have it all. They have a good life, they have a good paying job, they have lots of friends, but they're not happy. And we also know that there are people who seem to be in a bad spot and are struggling to make ends meet, but they've managed to be happy. Um, and that happiness is far more complicated, far more complicated than many of us realize. And many of us go through life chasing happiness like it's a lost horizon. You look out in the distance, if I can just get there, I'll be happy. And then you get there and then you're not happy. And you say, well, if I can just get there, then I'll be happy. And you get there and you're not happy. And then if I could just get there, I'll be happier. It's like a dog chasing its tail, right? Going around and around and around. And it never reaches the tail, but it's convinced if it can just bite the tail, it can be happy. But it continues just going around and around and around, chasing its tail, and it just never reaches the tail. But there's the opposite. Then there's people that think they used to be happy. right? And this is an interesting one. We've all seen this too. This is the opposite of the lost horizon happiness. The people who tell you about the good old days. Oh, nowadays everyone's miserable. But back when I was a kid, why? Everyone was happy all the time. Everyone was happy. Back when I was a kid, I was growing up in a little town where everybody was happy all the time. And that's also a delusion because if you actually went back to that time, you would find that people living in that little idyllic town of their childhood and that little perfect age of the 1950s, the 1980s, or whenever it was, they were just as unhappy as now. There were still deaths of relatives that people mourn. There were still people feeling they hadn't fulfilled their potential. There were still people that were unsatisfied with their positions in life. There were still marriages that ended badly, maybe at different rates. There were still people that were still married but were miserable, and that may have happened more often. There were still parents and children who fought with each other. There were still rivalries between people in their workplaces. There was still nasty discord between people. That this idyllic time that a lot of old people remember, the good old days. Oh, when I was a kid back in the day, everyone was so happy. No, they weren't. No, they weren't. No, they weren't. But just like you think, if we just advance this far into the future, we can be happy. They think if we can just get back, if I can just somehow get back to that time when I was happy, but they weren't happy. And our mind has this way of playing tricks on us with happiness. It's quite interesting. In one of his films, Slavoj Žižek, who I don't particularly enjoy his work, he has an interesting segment that I've thought about many times about Coke. The reason is because I like Diet Coke, right? It's my favorite drink, unnamed diet beverage. And he talks about how part of the secret to the financial success of Coke is that Coke makes you thirsty. Imagine that, a drink that makes you thirsty. But that's part of the secret because you drink Coke and you find it satisfying. But then, shortly after you drink the Coke, it makes you more thirsty. And so you have a craving. And then you go and drink more Coke and it makes you thirsty again. And that part of pleasure is not only the moment in which the craving is fulfilled, it's the journey to the craving. If you were never thirsty, you would never enjoy a fresh glass of water. If you were never hungry, you wouldn't enjoy eating. And that this is one of the weird, dirty secrets about human pleasure, right? If you were never horny, you would not enjoy having sex. Having an unfulfilled craving is just as much part of human pleasure as relieving that craving and fulfilling it. And this makes it all very confusing as we think about heaven, right? The idea, in a lot of religious people's minds, if you die, you go to heaven, and in heaven, you are always happy. How does that work? And think about it, right? If part of being happy, part of enjoying, part of the happiness that you get from drinking a glass of water when you're thirsty is being thirsty first. If part of the happiness and joy and pleasure you get from eating is being hungry first, if part of the pleasure of having sex is being horny and craving sex prior to it, how can heaven, in the classical Christian interpretation, be this eternal place of pleasure all the time when we know that pleasure is predicated on not having pleasure? And this is a mind worm that many people just conveniently overlook. Many people think it's eating that makes me happy, and they forget that if they weren't hungry first, they wouldn't enjoy the food. Many people think that drinking a nice glass of unnamed diet beverage or regular beverage makes them happy, but they forget that if they didn't have that craving and they weren't thirsty first, it wouldn't do that. Right? And this points to a concept that the philosopher Hegel referred to as the unity of opposites. There are some things in this world that depend on each other to exist. You could not have any tall without short. Think about it. If there was nobody who was short and everyone was the exact same height, nobody would be tall. Right? The concepts of tall and short are reliant on each other. You can only have tall because you have short to compare it to. You can only have fat because you have skinny. You can only have up because you have down. And you can only have happiness because you have unhappiness. And if there was no unhappiness, there could be no happiness. And so the classical understanding of heaven that we have is this place of eternal happiness. How does that work? How can you be eternally happy in some glorious afterlife if your happiness is dependent on you not being happy at some point? The only way you can be happy is if you have a sad to compare it to. So if you think of some other universe, some afterlife, where people are happy all the time, you have to ask yourself, how is that possible? Right? These are games that we play. And as we're all going through life with that Rubik's Cube in our hands, trying to decode the secret of happiness, as we go through life with that 8 ball in our hands, going, can I be happy? Can I be happy? Don't count on it. Can I be happy? Can I be happy? You got it. This time you're right. Yes, now. As we're going through life shaking the 8 ball, as we're going through life playing with the Rubik's Cube, this is something that many of us have to come to terms with, is the reality that happiness and sadness are related. The reality that you can't have up without down. All of this is something we have to come to terms with. And I've said many times on these streams, many, many, many times on these streams, I have said, very common statement on these streams, that it is important to be able to live in the past and the present and the future at the same time. And there are some people who, when I say that, it just drives them up the wall. They say, Caleb, you cannot occupy different places in time simultaneously. You cannot live in the past and the present and the future at the same time. Well, you've got to try, because many people who are not happy, part of their unhappiness is they get trapped in the present. And as they are trapped in the present, they forget the past and they feel that the present they are in is eternal. They fall into the illusion that the present that they're in, which is unpleasant, is always going to be. And if you think about people who commit suicide or people who do very irrational things when they're angry, the reason that they are able to do that is because they are not able to live in the past or the future. They are stuck in the moment, or worse, they're stuck in the past. And to the suicidal person, they feel that the way they feel now, that the intense pain they're feeling is never going to go away. And so in order to make the pain go away, they take their own life, but they are deluding themselves because they could very easily get to a place where they feel better. Maybe not as easily as others. Maybe it's more of a struggle for them. Maybe they're facing, some very severe difficulties, but they get into the mindset that the way they feel in that moment is eternal. Or, when someone commits a very irrational act like murder or an extreme act of violence, they're just so angry, right, that they murder somebody, or they're so angry they just do something awful that they're going to regret later. It's because they can't see into the future and think, I'm going to regret this. They can't see into the future and think, I'm not going to feel this way in 2 days. Right. And they can't remember in the past when they've done things and regretted it before. Right. That really a very, very important part of mental health is the ability to have what they sometimes will call an observer, the ability to be in the moment, but also have part of you that is watching from above, that is disconnected and is watching your life from above and can observe the past and can predict the future or anticipate the future and sees what goes on at the moment in the context of the past, of a possible future, etc. That is a very, very important thing to do. And that is why one thing that we do in many of our books at CPI is we tell the story of the Center for Political Innovation. Right? And in this book, chapter 4 of this book, we go over the history of CPI. And in our new textbook, we go over the history of CPI. Why are we doing that? Because every time we tell the story of our organization, we learn it better and we develop more of an organizational observer. That's very important. Because one thing that has always frustrated me is when I see political activist groups that are on autopilot. They're on autopilot. And I was in a political activist group that was on autopilot. And there are many people in this country that call themselves communists that are in political groups that are on autopilot. One of those groups is the Communist Party of the United States. Right? The Communist Party of the United States, they just had their national convention last weekend. And at their national convention, they were handing out, I think somebody sent me one. Maybe I can even show you an image. They were handing out water bottles about 100 years of the Communist Party. Right? 100 years of the Communist Party. I think I'll send the image that somebody sent me. Hold on. I think it was Carl the Trinket Man sent it to me. I just have to pull it up in my phone and email it to myself and make it a slide and all of that. But I'll show you this image that was sent to me. Yes, the water bottles that they were handing out for 100 years of the Communist Party. And I see the water bottle and I'm all about swag. I think it's good to have swag, especially nowadays. It's a lot easier to create swag for political events than it used to. So I am not against swag. Don't get me wrong. Not against swag. I'm pro swag. I am pro swag. But this was sent to me. This swag from the Communist Party of the United States National Convention. I will put it on the screen. Hold on. Just got to export as PDF. Swag. All right. Here, hold on. This swag was given out at the Communist Party National Convention. Yeah, this was the swag that they gave away. And look at that. 100 years Communist Party USA. Now you look at that. And that's nice. And it's nice that the Communist Party's been around for 100 years. It's actually quite a bit longer than 100 years at this point. I think the founding was 1919. The merger, like the convention that merged them all into one group, was 1921. So it's actually a couple years longer than 100 years. But if you look at that, how do the people looking at that swag not go, hold up? We've been around for 100 years. And our membership numbers and our influence has not really expanded in the past few years. And in fact, all the polls right now seem to indicate that interest in Marxism and socialism and communism among young people is rising. But yet, we're not expanding as an organization. And in fact, of all the communist groups in America, we are the oldest. We've been around for 100 years. We got the brand. We are the official group, but we aren't massively expanding. And there's all this interest in socialism and communism. Why are we not growing? And the fact that they could hand out these water bottles, and I'm sure there's somebody in the Communist Party who looked at that and realized, oh, there's a problem. There's a problem here. But I can guarantee you there are some other people who are not thinking that, who are thinking, all right, I'm in the Communist Party. I've been here 100 years. All right. And they're not noticing that for the past 60 years, this organization has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller and weaker and weaker and weaker. And it's like they can't look at this water bottle and think, we've got a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Right. But they have no observer. Right. And I mean, for some people, maybe they're new. Maybe they just joined a year ago. Maybe they just joined a couple months ago. So they don't get it. They don't understand. But for anyone who's been in the Communist Party for more than a year or 2 years or 3 years, they have to realize something's wrong. Something's off. If they have any observer, they have to be like, wait a second. The conditions are getting better for people being interested in what we're about, but our membership is getting smaller, and our we have plenty of assets and plenty of resources, way more than any other communist group in America, but yet we are declining as an organization. I mean, something's gonna be on, right? But that requires having an observer. That requires being able to keep track of the growth and realize, oh, we're not growing. Um, a corporation, a capitalist corporation, keeps track of its profits. And, there's the law, the general law of capitalist accumulation. As Marx explained, it's expand or die. If a capitalist enterprise is not expanding, it starts to collapse, right? So if one is in a political group and that political group is not expanding and it has no goals for expanding, it has no goals for increasing its influence, or then you have to ask yourself, what is going on here? And one thing I will point out, right? One thing I will point out is that communist groups in America, a lot of them serve another purpose. I was in the Workers' World Party for many years, and the Party of Socialism and Liberation is a breakaway from the Workers' World Party. And both of those groups serve a purpose other than their stated purpose. Both of those groups exist to facilitate liberal protests. Whatever the latest trendy liberal cause is, whether it's Palestine or abortion and feminism or Black Lives Matter or jail Kyle Rittenhouse or whatever the latest trendy liberal cause is, the Workers' World Party and the Party of Socialism and Liberation, they exist in order to set up the stage, reserve the permit, set up the sound system, and have the rally. And their mindset is that by doing that, they are the vanguard. They are the leaders of the revolution, right? Because they are doing that. And their organization tells their members that we are a communist organization that seeks to establish a socialist government in the United States. But if you are involved in this group, you realize that the goal of establishing socialism in the United States is not really on the agenda. That's just kind of the ideology. The Marxist classes and all of that are just kind of something thrown out there to intellectually stimulate the membership, to motivate the membership, so they can do and perform the real purpose that the organization serves, which is facilitating liberal rallies. And if you listen to the speeches of Brian Becker or the leadership statements, right? And if you look at the internal life, they're always saying things like, "Oh, we ought to do more to spread the message of socialism. Oh, we ought to do more. We ought to," but they don't want to do that. They're not interested in spreading the message of socialism. They're not interested in winning the bulk of the American people over to socialism because that doesn't bring in any money. That doesn't help them pay the bills. Their job is to facilitate liberal protests, and the ideology and the stated purpose is there to motivate the members to do something else. And, the same thing could be said for the Communist Party USA, right? It's called the Communist Party USA. But what do the members of the Communist Party USA do? They go around campaigning for Democrats. I mean, that's about all they do. They go around and they petition for Democrats and they campaign for Democrats. And obviously, their stated purpose is very different. And obviously, they have somewhat of an internal life. They have classes on their ideology, they have discussion groups, reading groups, etc. But at the end of the day, all of that is just kind of a distraction or a form of entertainment provided to the members to motivate them to do what it is they're actually supposed to do, which is campaign for the Democrats, convince young people that are interested in communist ideas to campaign for the Democrats, try to lobby socialist countries to believe that the Democrats are their friends. That is more or less the purpose that they serve. And you can see this, right? And this is a weird aspect of communist groups in the United States, that they all do something other than this. There's a joke, an old joke I've told on these streams many, many times, but I haven't told it as much lately now that we're going and we're building CPI and all of that. But this joke that I'm about to tell, I wrote it when I was still in the Workers' World Party, and I told it to a few people, and they died laughing because they knew it was true. They knew it was true, and they thought it was very funny. But this joke really is the basis for Out of the Movement to the Masses. And the joke goes like this. There is an old lawyer, and he has a dream. And in his dream, the voice of God tells him, "You must hire a communist to work at your law firm." He wakes up in a cold sweat. Wow, I just heard the voice of God tell me to hire a communist to work at my law firm. Oh, wow. So he goes to the office of the Communist Party of the United States and he says, "I am willing to pay a very high wage, high salary for one of your members to come work in my office. I believe this is what God wants me to do." So a couple members of the Communist Party are employed at his office, and he thinks, this is what I need to do. So he takes the two young Communist Party USA members into his office, into his law firm, and he says, "All right, I've got a bunch of papers here, old legal papers. I need you to file these papers. I need you to file them. At the end of the day, I'll come back and I'll see if you filed the papers." So he goes away and he comes back at the end of the day and he walks into the room and the two Communist Party members are still sitting there and the papers are exactly where he left them. And he says, "Guys, why didn't you file the papers?" And they look at him and they say, "Republicans still have control of Congress. And we're about to have an election and Joe Biden might lose. We need to focus on defeating the Republicans right now. And maybe after the election this fall, and maybe if we can take back Congress, maybe then we can file the papers. But right now, we need to defeat the right wing. We need to fight the right wing. We can't file the papers." And the lawyer looks down. He says, "This is the stupidest thing I ever heard. You guys are fired. No, this isn't going to work." And he thinks, "Okay, I must not have gotten some real communists. I'm going to go find some real communists, and that they'll work in my law firm." So he goes down to some bookstores or whatever, and he finds some other communists, a Trotskyite and a Maoist, right? A Revolutionary Communist Party guy, a guy from Socialist Alternative, and he's like, "All right, these guys, they look really revolutionary. They'll file the papers." Takes them to his office, says, "See these papers, file them. And I'll come back at the end of the day and I'll see if the papers are filed." So he goes back to his work, and he comes back at the end of the day, and they're not there. But neither are the papers he told them to file. And so he goes looking for them, and he finds them outside on the street. And they're selling his papers. And they've got 5 $1 bills that they collected. And he says, "What are you doing?" They said, "Well, we're selling the papers." He said, "I didn't want you to sell the papers. I wanted you to file the papers." And he says, "Yeah, but we just made $5. Look at all these $1 bills. And we just got the phone number of a guy. We're going to go meet him for coffee and try to sell him some more papers." And he's like, "Oh, God." He's like, "Oh, you guys are crazy." So then he says, "All right, forget the Maoists, forget the Trotskyites. I am going to hire me somebody from Workers' World Party or Party for Socialism and Liberation. Those folks will file the papers." So he goes to the headquarters. He goes to the People's Forum in New York City. He goes to the International Action Center office, and he hires a couple of them. And he says, "These guys look serious. They'll file the papers." Takes them to his office, says, "All right, guys, see the papers, file them." And they all roll up their sleeves, and they look like they're ready for action. He's like, "All right, go file the papers." Goes away, comes back at the end of the day. The papers are all still there, not filed, but there's a leaflet sitting on the table. And he's like, "Oh, shit. Oh, no. Oh, no." He goes to the leaflet, and what is it? It's a leaflet, and it says, "Rally in Times Square to file the papers." And he's like, "Oh, please. No, 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 no." So he goes to Times Square in the center of Manhattan, and the NYPD has created a cage, a protest cage with barricades around it. There's a huge sound system set up. And there's a huge stage set up. And there's 20 or 30 or 40, maybe even 50 or 60 people there. And they all have big signs that say, "File the papers." And they're all chanting, "File the papers, file the papers, file the papers." And then they put someone on the microphone who's transgender. And the transgender person gets up and says, "The fight to file the papers is also the fight for transgender rights." And everyone goes, "Yay!" And then they grab a Palestinian, and the Palestinian gets up there and he says, "The fight to free Palestine is also the fight to file the papers." And everyone goes, "Yay!" And they're chanting, "File the papers, file the papers, file the papers." And another guy gets up there and he says, "If we don't file the papers, we're going to have a communist revolution." And everyone goes, "Yeah, that's right. Better file the papers right now." Another person gets up and he says, "Well, maybe the papers aren't filed, and maybe we lost this time like we lose every other time. But you know what? One of these days, we're going to walk into the office and those papers are going to be filed, and there'll be nothing they can do about it. Yay!" And everyone applauds. Yay! File the papers. File the papers. And the lawyer is just standing there with his mouth open. And he's like, "What in the world is wrong with you communists? All I needed you to do was file the papers. And not one of you, not the Communist Party, not the Maoists, not the Trotskyites, none of you could file the papers." And the guy from the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the guy from the Workers' World Party, they get this very angry look on their faces. And they say, "Excuse me, sir, you cannot compare us to the other groups." And he says, "Why can I not compare you to the other groups?" And the guy says, "All those other groups, they just talked about filing the papers, but we're the ones that actually did something about it." They're the ones that actually do something. And I told that joke when I was actually in the Workers' World Party because I was realizing how absurd their movementism really was. Right? That this is the problem with the communist groups in America is none of them can file the papers. Filing the papers means going to our class and building a movement for socialism. Going to our class and explaining that the problems are rooted in the capitalist mode of production, and explaining that we need a society where the banks and factories and industries are organized to serve public good, not the profits of a wealthy few, and building a movement to carry that out. And every communist organization and every communist group somehow just can't manage to do that. They all have found something else to do. And the communism is just this like distraction. This distraction that enables the members to keep doing that other thing. Right? And that is a problem. And the way that this problem perpetuates itself is nobody sits there and says, hold up, how are we getting any closer to socialism? How are we actually achieving our goals? Nobody says that. And there are excuses that people use, right? Lenin has this quote about there are years where there are years where weeks happen and there are weeks where decades happen. And they say, oh, well, we're just not in a revolutionary period. They say, we're not in a revolutionary period. Of course, we're not going to see any success. Of course, we're not going to grow and expand, but we're just not living in a revolutionary period. So that's fine. They have all these excuses. But at the end of the day, if you really get down to it, the overwhelming majority of communist groups in the United States have absolutely no plan for actually succeeding in building a mass movement and taking the United States to socialism. No plan whatsoever. And they all just carry out a function under this system. And that function is not getting us anywhere closer to socialism. And that function is not even what the members want. And the members are kind of mesmerized by the ideology or entertained by it intellectually. And that entertainment motivates them to do the something else, to do the other thing that enables the group to get funding and continue to exist. And, this was made most, people have been there. People have been there, right? This was made most blatantly obvious to me during the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. Because when Bernie Sanders was running for president, right, millions of Americans were supporting a man who called himself a socialist. And I was saying, I was really angry with the political group I was in. And I said to them, I am really, really upset. That should be us, right? We should be the ones telling people about socialism, right? And the fact that Bernie Sanders has done this we failed, right? It should be our socialism, our anti-imperialist socialism that is becoming popular among the masses. And I remember one of the leaders of the group said to me, she didn't even just say it to me. She laughed. And she laughed. And she said, do you think we could ever be as big as Bernie Sanders? And she laughed. And I said to her, well, gee, the goal, we're supposed to be taking power at some point, aren't we? So you're laughing at the idea that we could ever be as popular as a U.S. senator from Vermont. And our stated goal is to run the government of the country. And then she stopped all of a sudden. She stopped laughing. And her eyes got very big. And I don't think this person was a conscious deceiver. Right? I don't think she's a liar. Not on that issue at least. I think that she just realized what she had said. Right? The goal had been long lost. And the function, which the function was really the only thing keeping the group alive. And the notion of ever achieving the goal had been long forgotten. And so then that raises the question of why the group still exists. I mean, if the stated goal is something that the leaders of the group don't even think is possible, don't even think can be achieved, well, then the question is, why is the group existing? Well, it's existing to serve another purpose. But is that other purpose that it's serving helpful at all? And if anything, if you realize that situation exists, the group should huddle up and have a conversation about what our real purpose is and say, do we want to achieve our real purpose, our real function, or not? Because it seems like there's a doublethink. On the one hand, we're supposed to be this communist group that's eventually trying to create a socialist society. And on the other hand, we have absolutely no plan for ever doing that. And instead, we're just carrying out this other function. And we should just have an honest conversation about that. But if you don't have an observer, and if you're not capable of measuring success and failure, and you're not thinking about where you were 2 years ago, where you were 3 years ago, where you'd like to be a year from now, where you'd like to be 2 years from now, if you never have that ability to track success and failure, if you just say, oh, it's not a revolutionary period, it's just not a revolutionary period, if that's the way you're operating, then at that point, you're not going to be able to just acknowledge what's going on. You're not going to be able to just come to terms with where things are at. And this is the kind of thing that I have spent a great deal of time thinking about. And this is why Center for Political Innovation exists. I can't not think about that. This is the kinds of things that keep me up late at night. These are the kinds of things that I write huge books that are many pages in length thinking about. This is why the Center for Political Innovation exists, and it's why we're called the Center for Political Innovation. Emphasis on innovation, because if just doing the left thing was going to work, it would be working, and it ain't. And when I go to communist countries, I do not see people doing the left thing. What woke Western leftists do, and what the people running North Korea and the people running Cuba and the people running Venezuela and Nicaragua do, are like oil and water. They don't mix. And actually, what communists in Africa and communists in Asia, communists in the former Soviet Union, communists in South America do is a lot closer to what Donald Trump does than what the woke left does. And I'm not just talking about what they believe, I'm talking about their actual practice. Communism has always been a populist movement. It is working to advance the interests of the people. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx writes, all previous political movements have been movements on behalf of minorities. But the proletarian movement is a movement on behalf of the immense majority and in the interest of the immense majority. Right? And when I go to international communist gatherings and I meet communists from South America and Central America, and I meet communists from African countries, what I'm seeing is movements of people, big movements of people who have come together to try and improve their lives with economic policies intended to create growth, intended to build hospitals, build schools, build highways, build power plants, increase wages, increase living standards, eradicate unemployment, provide access to health care, provide jobs. And that is generally what communists do all over the world. In fact, when the communists took power in Russia, what did Stalin do? He launched 5-year economic plans, and he mobilized the population to go out and build and construct, and they turned that country into an industrial power. an industrial power that was big enough that when the Nazis invaded, they drove the Nazis out, that they invented space travel. They got Sputnik in orbit. They got Yuri Gagarin into outer space. The Chinese Communist Party, again, they built a mass movement, seized control of the country, and they built it into what is today the second largest economy in the world. And communist governments are focused on mobilizing a movement on behalf of the immense majority of the people in their country to increase living standards, to create a better life for the people of their country, and to increase happiness. That is generally the goal of communist movements. And we all know about the ugly side. Because communism in the 20th century had a very ugly side. The Cultural Revolution did not increase happiness. Stalin's purges, the purge trials of 1937, they did not increase people's happiness. The executions in the aftermath of the Cuban Revolution did not increase happiness. The suppression of religion by the communist government did not increase happiness. And throughout the 20th century, the communist movement learned some key things. And the key things that it learned, number one, is that you cannot build an egalitarian society in poverty. It's very clear, if you read Marx and other things, that the basis of building a society of equality is eliminating scarcity. That the basis of inequality and the basis of enforced social hierarchies is scarcity. And as long as there's not enough to go around, and as long as there's a limited amount, some people will have and some people will not have. And that the role of a socialist or communist government is not to make everyone equal. It is rather to overcome the irrationality of the capitalist mode of production and organize the economy with 5-year economic plans, with central planning, with public control of the banks, public control of major industries, so that the level of abundance in society can rise, so that scarcity and poverty can be eliminated, so that we can reach that ultimate goal of a world in which there is no inequality because there's enough for everybody. Communism, a world without any inequality, a world without any government, a world where people can just take what they need and do what they feel like doing, to each according to his own ability, from each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs, that is only possible in a society of vast abundance. And that what we learned in the 20th century was that if you try to create equality with willpower, if you try to create equality in a state of scarcity, that is a recipe for disaster. And the Cultural Revolution and Pol Pot's Cambodia, and even the early years in Cuba when Che Guevara was running the economy without material incentives, it's a recipe for disaster. The goal and the purpose of a socialist state is to overcome the irrationality of capitalism, to defeat the restraints and the boot heels of imperialism, and thus organize the economy so that there can be unlimited economic growth. That's the first thing the communists learned in the 20th century. And if we've learned anything, if Deng Xiaoping and the Chinese Communist Party has taught the world anything, it's that having a market sector and utilizing a market sector is necessary. It's that the point is to raise the level of abundance and use state central planning and the state, or overseeing the economy in order to make that happen. And that poverty is not socialism. but to be rich is glorious. And that the whole point of socialism is to create economic growth. That's one thing that was learned. The second thing that was learned was that not everyone can be a communist. Right? To understand the hella complicated political ideas that we talk about on these streams, to engage with these ideas, to and all that, that's not for everybody. And that expecting the entire population to adopt this ideology is a mistake. And that there's going to be diversity of thought. And even among socialists and communists, there's going to be diversity of thought. And that what is necessary is to maintain a layer of people that are very loyal to the revolution and loyal to the project. But beyond them, to let the other people exist. Let those who don't agree exist. Let those who want to start their own business start their own business. And the idea that everyone must be part of an overall state-run economy and that everyone must be made and forced to understand and mouth the communist ideology is a recipe for disaster. People are going to think different things. People are going to want to just be in it for themselves, are going to want to start a business, are going to want to be creative in their own way. The government shouldn't be running hotels. The government shouldn't be running restaurants. You do need consumers to vote with their dollars on fun stuff like clothing, like children's toys, like movies. However, you cannot have profits running rampant. You can't have a society where profit controls and is the dictating force. You can have a planned economy, but you can let the market and let people vote with their dollars and let things that are fun flourish in a market sector. You could do that. And that if the only place a person can advance themselves is in the state bureaucracy, pretty soon your state bureaucracy is going to be full of people who don't believe in your ideology anymore, but are just looking to advance themselves. If the only way you can make more money and have more power and have more influence is to join the government bureaucracy, pretty soon your government bureaucracy is going to be full of people who don't believe in your ideology, are not committed to the socialist project, but are simply there because they want bureaucratic privilege. And that is a big problem. And the next thing that we've learned, I would argue, is that the dialectical materialist philosophy has in it a very big problem. Well, two very big problems. The first very big problem with the dialectical materialist philosophy is that it denies one of the most important things that human beings need, which is spirituality. Materialism, dialectical materialism, says that all that exists is matter. Says that the thoughts in your mind are only there because you have a piece of matter called a brain. Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. That thoughts, ideas, feelings are merely the reflection of the material world, and that the material world comes first, thoughts, feelings, ideas, emotions, etc., come second, and that thoughts, feelings, ideas cannot impact the material world. Right? That, and as a human being, as someone existing in our time, I would say that, first of all, thoughts, feelings, and ideas can affect the material world. Mind over matter. Having the spiritual ability to push yourself through hard times is important. Believing in something that may not be in your economic interest and committing yourself to it is very powerful. And that what people believe and what people are passionate about is very important. And it's not merely a reflection of material, and that material can be impacted by people's feelings. When people feel very, very passionate They can do things that they would not normally be able to do. They can summon strength they wouldn't normally have. And if people don't care, they might be physically able to do something, but they may not have the willpower to do it. And we all can see this in real life. Right? We can all see this. In real life, your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions have a big impact on what you are able to achieve and what you are able to do. And that shows that your thoughts and feelings, etc., are not simply the reflection of material. That what you are able to spiritually and psychologically motivate yourself to do and not motivate yourself to do has a lot with what you're actually able to do. And you can see many examples of this. Attitude is important. Feelings are important. Intention is important. Motivation is important. Passion is important. All these things are very, very important. And the materialist philosophy says they are not. It says they are an illusion. It says that all that exists is matter, and I think we should reject that. Secondly, the dialectical aspect of dialectical materialism says that conflict is the motive force of history. It says that the way history moves forward is by people fighting with each other. Well, people do fight with each other, and that does move forward history. So they're kind of right. But that is not the only essence of what goes on. Fighting and clashing are not the only way on which people advance. It's one way that people advance, and it is often necessary. And that there is a process in the universe where one will divide into two. But there is also a process in the universe where two can recombine into one. And when one divides into two, but then the two recombine into one, the one that exists can be much stronger than the one that existed before. The division was necessary to resolve differences, and then the reunification can be even more potent and powerful. So the notion that dividing, clashing is the only source of power is an oversimplification. It is missing a key aspect of the nature of reality, which is, yes, divisions are important, but restoration is also important. And this is something that the dialectical materialist philosophy also misses. And I think we can recognize that. And on that basis, if we realize that fighting and conflict is not the only source of strength, and if we also realize that spiritual power is important and feeling and passion and emotions are very important, we can realize that the communist view of religion in general, seeing all religion as a force of oppression, is not correct. But rather, the communist view of religion is a reaction to how religion existed in the feudal society. And that the communist dialectical materialist philosophy is more or less an overcorrection to the feudal mentality. In feudalism, there is no conflict and struggle. Everyone is born into their place. Everyone is just naturally born into their place. And in feudalism, everything is spiritual. It's all about God. It's all about divine right. There is no recognition of material economic interests. So communism as an ideology comes along and seeks to tear, it comes out of the French Revolution, and it comes out of the anti-feudal revolutions, and it seeks to tear apart the horrendous restraints that humanity lived under. And it says there is no divine right. That king does not rule by the will of God. That's just something he made up to tell us to obey him. He said God gave him the crown. He didn't. So we reject that. It says, they say we should never rebel, that we are born into our place. If we're born a serf, we stay a serf. If we're born a blacksmith, we stay a blacksmith. If we're born a soldier, and we say no. We say absolutely no. We say that we will rebel against our conditions. We will resist. We will clash. So the communist ideology makes perfect sense in the historical context because it is in rebellion against a society that said to never rebel. And it is in opposition to a society that said material doesn't exist and everything is justified by the spirituality that we, the material earthly authorities, are dictating in our material interest. So you can see how the feudal society gave birth to the dialectical materialist philosophy. It was the antithesis of the feudal order. But what we are seeing now, in an age where feudalism has been defeated, in an age where religion is not imposed on people in the same way, in an age where our rulers don't rule with divine right, in an age where social mobility exists, in an age where we, are much more allowed to question things and think for ourselves and challenge authority, we're seeing that now there is much more of a need for restoration, for unity. And we're also seeing now that there is much more of a need to motivate the spiritual side of people. That we're living in an age where people are being told there's no purpose in life. People are being told that life has no real meaning. People are being told that right and wrong doesn't exist. And people are crying out for spirituality. They're not being stifled by an imposed spirituality as they were in the past. They are rather crying out for some form of spiritual liberation, some form of spiritual enlightenment. They are finding hollow existence. They want spirituality. And on top of that, people want restoration. The rebellion, the splitting, the one dividing into two is tearing apart families. It's tearing apart communities. People can't be friends anymore. People can't stay in touch with people. People can't believe in anyone anymore. We know too much about each other. We see too much of each other's ugly sides. We fight over every disagreement. And it's very, very hard to maintain a relationship, to hold a group together. And people are reduced to an atomization. And in their atomization, they want a community and they want to believe in something. But it's harder and harder than ever before. And people find themselves in a cold atomization. They're lost. That's where people find themselves on. And it's not happiness that they're in. But I'm here to tell you two things. I will end my remarks about happiness by telling you these two things. These are two secrets to being happy. Take it or leave it. Maybe it won't work for you. Maybe it's not what you need to hear. These are my two secrets to being happy. My first secret for being happy, I first got a glimpse of it when my family hosted a student from Bulgaria. When I was a young child, or not, I was an older child, not a teen. I was a preteen. My family hosted an international student who was attending a local college. We became like his host family. We showed him what American life was like. He was from Bulgaria, formerly communist country. And in my naivete, my childish ignorance, I asked him one day, does anyone in Bulgaria still believe in communism? And this guy was not a communist. He was studying in the United States, but he said yes. Yes. His grandfather still believed in communism. And I said, why does your grandfather believe in communism? Because I had heard that communism was just absolutely horrible. No one could ever believe in communism. So I said, how does your grandfather believe in communism? Well, he told the story of how his grandfather had lived through the horror of the Second World War. And after the Second World War, the communists had gathered all of the young men in the country and put them to work paving the roads of Bulgaria. And they were mobilized to go from village to village, from city to city, throughout the countryside, throughout the mountains, paving roads. And it was hard work, but it was the greatest time in his grandfather's life, because he was there with people of his own age, and the country was healing from the devastation of the Second World War. And every village and every town they went to, they were greeted as heroes, and they were working selflessly for the good of the country. And there was a spirit that we're going to have a whole new country. We're going to overcome the horrors of the war. We're going to build. And this was the period where Bulgaria was first fully electrified. And this was the period where Bulgaria's university system was created, when illiteracy was wiped out. And he remembers those early years of communism in Bulgaria, the post-World War II reconstruction, as the greatest years in his life, the time in his life where he experienced the most happiness. And from where did this happiness come? Well, this happiness came from working with other people. It came from collective effort, from joint effort. Working together with other people to achieve a goal. Combining your strength and energy is a way to find happiness. And I have seen this in many different areas of life. But when 2 people, or 10 people, or 12 people, or 100 people are working together, and the goal that they seek to achieve is on the horizon, and they're all one-upping each other in exerting strength, and they're bouncing ideas off of each other's heads, and they're learning from each other. And when somebody falls down, the group lifts them up. And when somebody makes a mistake, the group learns from the mistake and they improve. And everyone is trying to create a better energy atmosphere. And the goal is very, very nearby, or it's visible, it's achievable, it's not unachievable. And the group is sacrificing together and aiming to achieve that goal. That is a way to find happiness, in that state of being, when people are collectively joining together and marching forward for achieving the goal. When people see the goal on the horizon and they believe that they can reach it, and they're not competing with each other, they're rather trying to embolden and empower everyone in the group to achieve that goal. That is a state of happiness. That is a state of happiness. Why do old people who lived through World War II light up when they talk about World War II? World War II was a disaster. Millions of people died. It was horrible. But yet, you talk to old people who lived through World War II, they light up. They remember the war years. Why? Because it was that feeling. They were working together. They were sacrificing. Right? That is one road to happiness. Joining an organization that is committed to achieving things, carrying out successful operations for a cause that you all believe in, that is a way you can find happiness. And you can choose to believe me or not, but I know that's true. And that's why I cannot stop organizing. People say to me, "Oh, Caleb, why don't you just stop organizing?" I can't, because I know this happiness too well. Amid all my complaints about the different communist groups I was in, amid all of the frustrations I have, I remember the moments when we were like this, when the goal was there and we were moving at full speed ahead. And I remember that. And I know that joy. I know that happiness. And that is what I am trying to create with the Center for Political Innovation. And we have experienced it to some degree. The thrill of changing the world, the thrill of working together with other people in a shared vision or purpose of trying to change the world. That is a very potent and powerful state of happiness. And that is what we are trying to create with the Center for Political Innovation. That is why the organization exists, because I know that our president, Elizabeth Young, feels the exact same way. This is how we know happiness can be achieved, right? And that's why we exist. We exist to carry out operations to achieve our goal. We seek to encourage each other to work hard. And that is my first advice about happiness. One step toward finding happiness is joining an organization that will put you to work, an organization that will help you to achieve things, an organization in which people share the same goal and vision and work together to carry it out. That is one step toward happiness. And here's my second piece of advice for happiness. And this is a new one. This is a new one. But one thing that a lot of people do is they go through the world looking for the bad. And it's not because they're bad people, because they have a bad attitude. It's often a mechanism for self-protection, right? If you're walking down the street, you want to be looking over your shoulder because you don't know if somebody might rob you, right? If you're if you're meeting somebody for the first time, you look for signs that they might be somebody who's dishonest or might be trying to rip you off or is a con artist or something like that. And especially if you have trauma, if you were abused growing up, if you were a victim of a violent crime, if you've had negative experiences, you can find yourself going through life constantly on guard, looking for negative things. And I don't blame you for that. And it's not your fault. It's necessary to acknowledge to yourself about why and forgive yourself for that. It's not because you're bad. It's not because you're stupid. It's a natural response to what you've been through. But while we can sympathize with ourselves and sympathize with others who do this, and this is how most people nowadays are. Most people nowadays go through life looking for the bad because they want to protect themselves from the bad. And we have social media and Netflix and television and all kinds of things alerting us about all the bad out there. And we go through life looking for the bad. And if you go through life looking for the bad, I got bad news for you. You're going to find it. If you're a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. And unfortunately, even though you may be in a situation where you've learned to go look for the bad, look for the hardship, look for the distrust, etc. Even though it's not your fault, even though that's how our society has trained people to be, I think almost all people do this at this point. I think it's pretty normal. You're not alone, right? You don't have to have some horrendous trauma. I think it's just how our society is, right? I mean, it's, Women are trained to go through life thinking every person they meet might be a pervert or a sexual harasser. Men are trained to go through life thinking that every man they meet might be somebody who wants to beat them up or someone who wants to challenge them or degrade them or make them feel less, or everything's a pecking order bat. I think this is normal, honestly. Some people have it worse than others because they have worse trauma than other people. But honestly, I think almost everyone in our society goes through life looking for the bad. And hate to break it to you, but if you go through life looking for the bad, you will find the bad. But my challenge to you is to go through life looking for the positive. Go through life with a love radar. Walk down the street, and when you see people, see if you can detect the love between them. I did this in my neighborhood today. Just walked down the street like I normally do, but I thought today I'm not going to look for potential danger. I'm not going to look for things about people that I might not like. I am going to try and detect the love that I see in other people. Went into a pizza shop in my neighborhood. Two guys work in the pizza shop, both of them Latino guys. One's younger, one's older, and they work in this pizza shop every day. And I sat in the pizza shop and I ate my slice of pizza and I thought there is love between these two guys, right? The older guy and the younger guy, they have rapport. They're buddies, they're bros, they work together. I see love there. Woman walks into the pizza shop, teenage girl, and she's got her younger brother with her, who's like a toddler. And she walks in and she's holding his hand. And I thought there's love between the older sister and the younger brother, that she's taking him around, and they walk into the pizza shop together. I said, there's love there. I walk down the street. I see a family together. I see them laughing together. I see the love. And it's a challenge because this is not my natural inclination. It's none of our natural inclination to walk through life looking for the love, trying to detect any love that is around us, not looking for the robbers, not looking for the perverts, not looking for the con artists, not looking for the liars, not looking for the anger and negativity or the fight, but going through life with a love radar, trying to detect all the love that you might encounter and see all the love that exists between families, between people who are good friends and know each other, between people who care about each other, and just try to observe all the love you can possibly see in other people. Imagine doing that, because we don't do that. There's love all the time right in front of our faces. There's a lot of evil things in the world, and that's what we pay attention to. And we go through life. Is there hate over there? Is there an attack over there? Is that person a liar? Is that person a robber? Are those two people at odds with each other? And we go through life observing people, looking for the negative. But my challenge is, if you want to train your mind to find happiness, go through life actively looking for love between people. Go through life trying to pick up on and detect any hint or sign of love that you can see. That's my advice. I'm going to try to do that. It's not easy. It's not my natural inclination, but I'm trying to do it. And I feel like if I try to do this, I will learn more about love because I will observe it. I will acknowledge its existence. I will pay attention to it, and I will learn better how to love myself and how to accept love from other people, because I will be on the lookout for love. I will try to make sure that no love that comes within my vision goes undetected. And I will try to digest and see all the love that exists around me And through doing that, I will learn how to better love myself. I will learn about the nature of love, and I will understand love in a way that I have never understood it before. And that's my challenge to you. So that's my second bit of advice regarding the pursuit of happiness. And those are my opening remarks for tonight.